The 1980s had witnessed the success of designers who let their taste for extravagance run wild, highlighting exaggerated super-femininity in pop color. It was a response to an era in which everything seemed possible. But in the 1990s, both the world and the world of fashion were a very different place to be.
Stand by, 4, 3. Oh, good.
Now tell me about the influence of pop culture. I mean, yesterday we went to the party, and you know everything. There's just everything since.
I think the culture is not only old history; it's also today. I think everything we're doing today is culture. It's not be culture in the next 100 years.
The extravagance of the 1980s crossed the Atlantic with the Italian Gianni Versace, who dressed the most expensive top models of the time with an overdose of color and gold.
They are my actors, the way I express my fashion through these women like Karen, simple heaven. Beauty, class, freshness. A lot of things.
His was a totally complex-free, over-the-top style that was to contaminate the planet far beyond the Milan-Miami axis. But in parallel, a counter-style at the opposite end of the spectrum to his gilded garments was emerging in Europe. Dark. Violent. Involved. Conceptual. This new fashion was in tune with the cultural and political upheaval of the era, from techno to grunge, from Chernobyl to the economic crisis. Baptized anti-fashion because it annihilated the glamorous aspect that had triumphed up until then. This veritable aesthetic manifesto that shook fashion up with its deconstruction, disproportion, recycling, and fashion show performances was to make a lasting mark on the style of the end of the century. Instead of rejecting the anti-fashion transplant, fashion was, on the contrary, to take it in and would never be the same again.
Anti-fashion. It means simply I don't follow the trend. Yeah, fashion is fashion. It's like air. So we breathe the air. So naturally we are influenced or polluted. The fashion goes changing every 3 or 4 years. But in that meaning, I'm not a fashion designer. I don't chase the trend.
The pioneers of this anti-fashion movement were two Japanese designers who arrived at the same time in Paris at the beginning of the 1980s. Taking the opposite direction to the pompous style of Mugler and Montana, who had triumphed up until then, Yohji Yamamoto and Rei Kawakubo advocated a radical popper style, which initially provoked wide-eyed disbelief.
So I was born as the only son of war widow. My mother was working like hell, making clothing. So in my mind, making clothing is already a hard job.
I've never laughed so much. We were so shocked. Shocked. We simply couldn't conceive that fashion could turn into something like that. It was like a nuclear explosion, and the image really made its mark. It was like a natural catastrophe. Their clothes had holes in them, and even the way the models walked, it was totally revolutionary. That robotic way of walking.
Everyone was still wearing high heels and sequins. Then this came along and we found it totally twisted. We didn't understand the proportions, the disproportions. Great clumpy shoes, women in flat shoes with messy hair and no makeup, with gigantic jumpers, and their clothes weren't even finished. They totally revolutionized European fashion.
From the beginning, some very tough critics, real critics, and I liked it.
Made in Japan, and the troops are here to follow. Journalists, buyers and photographers reconstitute a Japanese microcosm using the most sophisticated techniques. With their miniature cameras and their pocket tape recorders, they're surprisingly efficient and professional.
Well, we invaded Japan. We were the first Japanese, if you like. It's our second largest market, and we've been present there for 25 years. Japanese department stores are full of French couture products and ready-to-wear items, so we can hardly begrudge their presence here in Paris.
Rei Kawakubo, the only woman among the samurai, takes us to extremes. Her approach borders on revolt against a certain world imperialism of French fashion.
Let's get rid of the ideas that have been around for a long time, such as folklore and traditions, and let's start again with something new.
Would you like to choose the women who wear your clothes?
No, not at all.
Doesn't it oblige women to change the way they live?
Well, if it does, I'd be very happy.
Kawakubo's claim, or her manifesto even, was that modern women no longer needed to be submissive to men, and that they should now assert themselves, comme des garçons, like boys. As a result, the Comme des Garçons label took on the overtones of the agitprop Kawakubo infused her clothes with. Out went the geisha of the Japan of her childhood, and out went the sexily dressed Western doll. In came a new woman who did not seek to please, who asserted her personality, and even her power, via clothes that were not for bimbos. With her strict, straight face, her geometrical bob, her unyielding authority, Rei Kawakubo herself embodied this new vision of women.
We were always being briefed. There was always a highly precise framework to follow and a particular way of doing things. It was so radical, but it brought a modernity with it, which made all existing fashion obsolete. I think her work is more about sculpture than clothes design. She had such a strong presence when she was in the office. She created a stress that certainly got things done.
He had a love of fashion, a sense of creativity and expertise. He was an expert in cutting and would spend hours on a pattern, with the material stretched out before him. The way he cut was not based on the shape of the body. The body was in the middle of the material, and the material was worked around it, like when building a kimono.
The hallmark of the samurai success can be seen in the boutiques they have opened near the Place des Victoires, one of the most expensive districts in Paris. People were a little confused, in fact. They thought they were walking in front of a gallery. They weren't used to seeing concrete boutiques with the hangers all set out 5 centimeters from each other. Today it seems completely normal to us, but that wasn't the case at the time. And some people would come into the shop and insult us because they just couldn't understand how clothes that were so unfinished could cost so much.
The deliberately unfinished clothes nevertheless delighted a highly enthusiastic following of women who were questioning things, and dared to do so, many artists and intellectuals. They embraced a new vision of luxury, loosely cut clothes cut in rare materials imported from Japan that were very comfortable.
Objectively, they had really done their homework. I'm convinced that they knew full well what they were doing when they arrived in Paris, what they were going to turn upside down. It was no coincidence that they decided to arrive together. They probably wouldn't tell you that, but Rei Kawakubo and Yohji Yamamoto were together, you know.
They lived together for over 10 years, and they hid their creativity from each other. They didn't share information on their collection. It must have been totally schizophrenic. I once asked Yohji, "In your private life, is Rei like this?" And he said, "No, she's very sweet."
When you arrived, both of you quite at the same moment, they had a tendency to put you together. What did you think of that?
I thought it is stupid to shout that I'm different.
That's a good answer. I couldn't imagine a better answer.
Another eventful night in Berlin, during which people replaced bulldozers, ripping out the odd boulder. Hammers were hard at work, symbolically destroying the wall. But the most striking image is this one. Millions of East Germans who have been queuing up since 5 in the morning. They're waiting for the banks to open as they're entitled to 100 marks per person for their first visit to the West. Taxpayers from the Federal Republic of Germany are paying as a gesture of solidarity.
At the start of the 1990s, the world entered a phase of instability.
Just one headline this morning, war, which started at 1 o'clock Paris time.
Air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq.
The breakup of the Soviet bloc. The Gulf War launched by the lure of oil profits. The triumph of rampant capitalism with ecological repercussions. The youth expressed its unease with these worrying current affairs via the nihilist grunge movement.
Where did the grunge movement start?
In Seattle in the 1980s.
Grunge groups?
Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam.
Its philosophy?
The philosophy is disappearing as opposed to appearing.
Is grunge a way of saying no to having to look good?
The United States is the country with the most standardized body aesthetics. Inevitably, any excesses from the norm usually experience a counter-trend. People don't strive to have a certain look, they strive to have a non-look.
You get grunge clothes from flea markets, dustbins, charity shops. I wear my mother's old tights when they're laddered.
We refuse all obligation, we've given up, we live in the present. And as we'll only end up doing odd jobs anyway, there's no point in working.
What will you do for a living?
Odd jobs, I don't know, bus driver or sell ice creams.
In fact, all the energy initially came from a certain revolt. You know when you're 19 years old, you want to change the world. And you think, oh no, that's not for me. I want something else. It was a revolt. The only thing I didn't agree with was the no future culture in London at the time. I immediately thought, no, there is a future, but you have to create it yourself.
After the Japanese, it was in Belgium, in Antwerp, that an anti-fashion clan started taking over. 6 pupils from the Antwerp Royal Academy of Fine Arts, who became known as the Antwerp Six, invented a fashion that was to match the times.
There was no pre-existing tradition of fashion in Belgium. We were the first. That wasn't bad, as it meant we didn't carry any weight on our shoulders. We were a small group of young people who were very motivated, and we were ready to change the world.
The first of the Antwerp Six to change the world of fashion was Mademoiselle Margiela, whose talent was immediately noticed by a certain Jean-Paul Gaultier.
Jean-Paul met Martin when Martin won the Antwerp Academy Award. Jean-Paul said at the time, that guy is streets ahead of the others. He could launch a label straight away. Martin went to see Jean-Paul and said, I'd like to work for you as an assistant. And Jean-Paul said to him, but you don't need to be an assistant. You have all the capabilities to be a great designer. And Martin said to him, well, I might have the talent all right, but I don't know how a fashion house works. So first I want to learn how a fashion house works, and when I feel confident about that, I can start my own fashion house. And Jean-Paul said, okay.
Jean-Paul once told me that he was the best assistant he'd ever had in his life.
And Martin Margiela ended up launching his own label. His beginnings were modest, but with simple pieces of furniture hunted down at flea markets and a pot of white paint, Margiela created the decor of his fashion house. He applied his penchant for recycling to his clothes. He had fun hunting down vintage pieces, which he would adapt, sew, cut, and paint. Arte Povera was born.
No, I didn't know what I was going to see. It was a total shock. A response to our overflowing, ultra-consumerist dustbins. Fashion had never dared to do anything like that. So I think it was normal that we felt scandalized by Martin's message or his aesthetics. Because we couldn't relate him to anything else. Well, we could actually draw a parallel with art. What was amazing was that his designs were associated with product of a very high technical caliber. I think people in the fashion business picked up on that very quickly. We were not dealing with a joke, but a real pioneer. It's true that I came out of there saying, only a frigid cow could wear that stuff. That'll teach me to hold my tongue, because my wardrobe is full of Margiela now.
And things really took off. With money-saving ideas, Margiela ignited the tradition of fashion shows, which became veritable happenings. Fashion journalists tipped each other off, and an increasing number of them took contemporary art evening classes with their overall clad teacher. He made Anna Wintour and Karine Rothfield take a metro trip to Slummet in suburban wasteland, where they could meet real kids. He then invited them to his own artist squat-style workshop, where he served them red wine in plastic cups before showing them the Super 8 film that replaced the season's fashion show. More importantly, Margiela decided to let his clothes take center stage by totally erasing his own personal image. He chose to refuse all interviews and photo sessions. Along the same lines, he even placed an anonymous label on his clothes. The label was meant to be removed with scissors, but as dictated by snobbery, no fan would ever take it off. Ironically, the 4 white pieces of thread peeping through the back of his clothes would have become the most famous of logos. The designer who had wanted to remain modest morphed into an invisible fashion god.
He was one of my best friends. I haven't seen Martin for 25 years now, I think. That was his decision. You have to ask him.
You think he wants to keep it that way?
Yes. I really wanted to have a child, so I decided to do that first and then launch my label. So as soon as my son was born, I began. I wanted to be ready to go to Paris. Just like a musician who writes music, or a painter who paints, I make clothes to communicate, to let a product convey an emotion.
I see you cross time, cross the sea, in your silver chains. You've broken the chains of bondage of your rural existence.
It was an incredible moment, just incredible.
You've broken free the fields and forests, wild child.
People no longer chose clothes as a disguise. They chose them to express something. That's the whole difference between the 1980s and the 1990s. People no longer use clothes to wow other people. They use them to feel good about themselves. It was very personal. Nothing was a coincidence. Nothing was just there. For example, if there's a pleat somewhere, that pleat corresponds to a movement, to suggest the wear and tear on the garment. I think that's what made her clothes so successful, their poetry.
It was a bit disconcerting because everything took off so quickly. I wasn't at all prepared for that. It really went very quickly. After the second fashion show, I made the Journal de Textile's league tables. I was right up there at the top, and I was wondering what was happening. I do what I want to do, what's right for me. Then it becomes something that a lot of women like. That's the miracle. It's no longer just me and my collection. The collection becomes something much more general. I thought there were already too many clothes in the world, and that I shouldn't make any more of them unless I could add something that hadn't yet been made.
Paris is the center of the fashion universe because it attracts people from all around the world.
The Belgians were not the only ones to get Paris buzzing. The city was the backdrop for a whole explosion of opposing styles that coexisted alongside each other. The Japanese, who were now being taken very seriously, paraded alongside the old school of Yves Saint Laurent and Chanel by Lagerfeld, with whom Wonder Boys, Jean-Paul Gaultier and Christian Lacroix were now on an equal footing. But the Parisian schedule also made way for newcomers, in particular the Baroque-style Englishmen from St. Martin's College, John Galliano, and shortly after, Alexander McQueen. Amidst this profusion of fashion, the media filter revealed above all the faces of certain top models who were everywhere to the point of saturation.
Linda Evangelista on a pencil holder. This year, the top models are all over school materials. Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck are now old hat.
It's the star system. We identify with it. You have to identify with a product, a man, or a woman. It makes kids dream.
Advertising companies realized that by giving us prominence, their products would sell better. Putting a name to faces made products more profitable in a way.
Are you not concerned that it's a profession of illusion?
Not at all. It's a fantastic profession which opens up many possibilities.
What would you like to do later?
But these celebrity models were not booked by the new generation of designers, like the rock-style Parisians Martine Sitbon and John Colonna, who preferred their models to have a more original, darker, rugged edge.
I don't like what you might call prototypes. I prefer beautiful human beings who have intriguing masculine and feminine characteristics.
When the agency called me, they said, "There's a girl who's absolutely perfect for you. She's small, she's got bandy legs, she walks funny, and she's got big teeth." And she was magical, marvelous, extraordinary, small, but wow.
Calvin Klein banked on Kate Moss as a celebrity model in their adverts, which were broadcast over and over again on MTV. The new generation of consumers identified with the ads and bought volumes of perfume and underpants.
Now that could definitely come between me and my Calvins. These are the 90s, man.
After the trail blazed by the Japanese, then the Belgian designers, it was the turn of the mass market to embrace anti-fashion. In a sugar-coated version, of course, but the codes of beauty were no longer quite the same. And once the style had filtered through to the public at large, the avant-garde moved on elsewhere. The fashion world took it all in their stride when a new chapter opened in the history of anti-fashion, minimalism. Things were now being cleaned up, simplified, and streamlined. The expression less is more moved from the architect's language onto the catwalks. The designer who best embodied minimalism was the Austrian Helmut Lang, who delighted fashion editors the world over.
The other major figure of the 1990s for me was Helmut. Everything he did was new. I loved his New York boutique. The interior design of the place was just totally spot on.
Helmut's minimalism was influenced by architecture, by German expressionism, by Bauhaus, by Vienna. When you know Vienna, it just takes a hold of you.
Before achieving worldwide recognition, Helmut Lang's clothes were modeled in a Paris fashion show for the first time in 1986.
At the time, the design was a bit less minimal. There was already rigid and streamlined forms, but more efforts were made perhaps to seduce with the clothing. They wrapped the body more. But with time, they became deliberately less seductive, whilst at the same time actually being more seductive as they were more radical. The shoulders were straight and where they should be, and the trousers were strict. They had a German touch.
You know, but I was never somebody who thought that a lot of loud colors together make you more beautiful.
This image of strictness was very subtly offset by great fantasy. There was absolutely nothing conventional about the use of fabrics. There were rubbers and plastics, which gave the clothes an offbeat quality. So strict didn't mean boring.
I think it is fabulous. It's a lot of fun. You know, it's fun to hang out. You can drink, cruise the web, and not worry about my boss looking over my shoulder.
Internet, gigantesque messagerie où tout peut être dit, tout peut être échangé, tout peut être recherché. S'agit-il d'un coup de marketing destiné à relancer la consommation de l'électronique et des composants électroniques? Difficile de répondre. Et puis, ces autres questions actuellement sans réponse. Qui aura accès aux services? Quel sera le prix des services? N'y aura-t-il pas embouteillage lorsqu'il y aura des millions et des millions d'abonnés? Reste que cette cyberculture, cette culture par ordinateur, a de quoi nous inquiéter.
In 1997, Helmut Lang had a hunch that the industry was changing. He left Paris for New York and replaced the sacrosanct fashion show by a video presentation on internet.
The communication, which is very important in our business, you know, is kind of like a very old pattern. It hasn't changed since 20 years. And we all talk about, you know, being very global and international and being very connected. We really wanted to explore to make that much more modern. Don't want it to be pretentious or an art video. It's an information about what we do, and that's what it is. The clothes are just made that people look great in them. That's it, you know, fashion is one thing, but the most important thing is that people look great in them, and it doesn't go much further than that.
Helmut Lang's minimalism was easier to wear than what the Japanese and the Belgians were producing, and it hit New York's chic avenues on a massive scale.
Get ready in line, we're going to be faster.
So, be careful, no? Luck, no? Jesus. Make a nice vision, no?
German designer Jill Sanders surfed on the wave of minimalism. Pairing it down with a white shirt and black suit, she dressed a new power woman. No longer the woman of the 80s who tried to make her mark by expanding her shoulders. No longer Rei Kawakubo's woman who rejected old-style femininity. Jill Sanders' Power Woman was not afraid to dress like a man as long as she was wearing luxury fabrics. Detractors called it lesbian chic.
That's what we were saying. It's so wonderful that more and more women understand, and they're going for it.
They're ready for it. Also, you know, why I love the show today is as if you have cut completely away the 80s. Yeah. You know, that kind of a woman. That's right. And you're going on to another sphere. Sequence. How do I look? Very good.
It was an era of raves, techno, trance, and house music. And Margiela's move proved to be a canny one. Being incognito was the mood of the moment, and the prevailing electronic music movements championed anonymity. From Daft Punk to underground resistance, musicians and DJs hid their faces behind masks and their names behind pseudonyms. Throughout the 90s, women's wardrobes had acquired new shapes and forms, and it was now men's turn to be given a new look. Raf Simons, who also came from Antwerp, created a Kate Moss's Little Brother style. He dressed emaciated teenage boys who looked ready to rave and trip to the beat.
Choosing to do menswear because I had to do it on my own and I had to work on myself. You know, it didn't start as a fashion structure. It just started as, okay, I want to show what a man can be also. I wanted to make what I wanted to wear and what an environment of people around me wanted to wear, which was the opposite of our perception of what men were wearing back in the days. We could not identify our bodies with how the bodies looked from the people who were at that time representing fashion. Huge and suntanned and muscled and blonde and very Americano. So yeah, we went the opposite, you know, like skinny and very adolescent and, you know, like white. So funny that I say that today because I just come back from a month holiday and I'm dead. Because I was always trying to bring something unique that wasn't out there. And suddenly I saw a lot of that coming into the fashion field of men's. The agencies were full, slim adolescent boys, small tailoring, you know, by silhouette array.
Thanks to these resolutely contemporary styles, the market spread, covering a wider public, men and women, young and old. With the rise of internet, fashion became global. From now on, everything was to gather pace.
The fashion world is in mourning this evening after one of its most talented designers was shot dead with 2 bullets to the head outside his home in Miami, Florida, earlier today.
We're all terribly affected. It's a horrible thing to have happened. Whatever the motive, the tragedy is an artist is dead.
I'm wearing my Versace dress in his memory.
People mourned the death of Gianni Versace the world over. And his funeral, which was fit for a king, highlighted the status that fashion designers had now reached.
Versace product sales are doing very well since the fashion designer was killed in Miami. In some boutiques, sales have even risen by 40%.
I don't think a bigger need, but maybe some of the logo type things might have a little more value to them than previously.
Luxury groups took this appetite for the major labels' logos very seriously. At LVMH, to boost the Dior and Givenchy houses, Bernard Arnault played the eccentricity card by employing 2 Englishmen, John Galliano and Alexander McQueen, in rapid succession. They intoxicated and inebriated fashion. But alongside this trend, other drier names such as Hussein Chalayan remained fiercely attached to the rebel independence of the anti-fashion line. At the end of the 20th century, people were concerned about the arrival of the new millennium. Aware of this climate of unease, Chalayan produced a response to it.
We need to practice for that.
So can you tell me why you're here at Hussein's show?
It's something new and exciting which has been lacking a long time in Paris. It's become so commercial and so money-oriented, and it's like boring, actually.
No, there's no future. I think I'm interested in timelessness, and I mean, if something, I don't know what future is now. I mean, what is future? How do I know what's going to happen to me in 5 minutes' time? That's the future. You can't define it. You don't know what it is.
Go away, and everybody position is to go down.
Okay.
I need music to be ready to roll.
Okay, cool.
The screens, the video, everything.
It was an absolutely beautiful collection, very modern. So can you comment on that?
In what respect? Can you be more specific? I can't say to you it was wonderful and modern myself. When it comes to describing clothes, I think they speak for themselves. So I'd rather you kind of, made your own judgment.
Every Chalayan fashion show was like experimentation. He went as far as full frontal exploration of the rise of the fundamentalism that was making headline news.
Because the whole thing evolved from this sense of defining your territory culturally and graphically, it just felt like a natural thing to do. I didn't really think about it for too long. This sense of isolation can be, deathly and mummy-like, and that's why I sort of went towards that.
It was a very moving show. I think that was probably something beyond fashion and much more into the art realm, and it certainly goes back to his roots and the idea the Middle East has about women.
Since the seed was sown by the Japanese designers in the early 1980s, the ranks of anti-fashion designers increased, and an increasing number of followers dressed only in black and white. But Rei Kawakubo was still streets ahead and headed straight for an ever more radical avant-garde. Her fashion shows always struck like bombshells as they explored new territory without ever repeating themselves. She even went as far as violently distorting the human body with hunchbacks and other growths, questioning the traditional criteria of beauty. Along the lines of this radical style, her communication became more radical too. From now on, Kawakubo refused all interviews and even prohibited television cameras at her fashion shows. Conversely, Yohji Yamamoto deviated from the eccentricities of his early career. Collection after collection, he blended two almost opposing fashion traditions with great panache, that of the French designers and Japanese ones. This subtle mastery has produced a classicism which is recognized by all his peers.
When you have kind of soft material, you will start draping on it, sometimes bias cut. When you have a tough, thick material, you're gonna cut sharply, you know. It's like something like construction. So it's all, I won't mix everything.
Bernard Arnault's gamble at Dior and Givenchy paid off. The infatuation that John Galliano and Alexander McQueen commanded sent sales rocketing. The successful model was reproduced elsewhere, with groups vying for the fashion houses and placing a new generation of designers at their head. Gucci hired Tom Ford, and Vuitton hired Marc Jacobs. These changes being made on Planet Fashion were to have repercussions on the anti-fashion designers.
I do think that there is a generation out there who just couldn't cope with a real shift in fashion.
For minimalist Helmut Lang and Jill Sander, with good sales, it became difficult to remain independent. At the start of the first decade of the 21st century, giving in to financial pressure, they agreed to being bought out by the Prada Group.
The Prada Group is in Italy, and they're taking care of the commercial and all the business-related stuff, and I am concentrating on my work, and it works very well.
But minimalism started sitting less comfortably with the bling-bling avenue fashion was taking.
If you're married to Prada, you have to make a high heel, it's that simple. Or you marry with Arnault, you have to make a bag. I understand everybody who stops fashion, no problem.
After he returned to Paris for a fashion show, Helmut Lang put an end to over 20 years of fashion and bowed out in 2005 to dedicate his time to his other passion, contemporary art. As a sign of the permanence of his decision, Helmut Lang violently decapitated the eagles that had proudly symbolized his New York boutique. He also shredded 6,000 pieces from his archives to make sculptures.
Would you live without fashion?
Yeah.
Jill Sander also left her fashion house, leaving a free space. Raf Simons reached a new milestone and accepted the Prada Group's proposition to take over the artistic direction at Jill Sander. He was the first anti-fashion designer to work under another's name.
Did you fit working for a group? How did it work for you? Because, you know, you've always in fashion this difference between independent and people, designers who work for groups. So.
Yeah.
And you were, for me, you were supposedly more attached to the independence, mind and reflection.
Yeah, it's not my brand. My brand is still independent in this stage, but yeah, I'm there for more than 6 years and I'm extending, so I guess there must be some fit somewhere.
In the ultimate transgression for an anti-fashion designer, after Jill Sander, the luxury house Dior poached Raf Simons in 2012.
Could you have done that? Work for a fashion house like, I don't know, Givenchy?
Technically, I know how to do it. I could do the job, no problem. But I didn't do it. I've been asked to, but I said no. Perhaps I'm too much of a purist. But for me, Anne de Millemeister should do Anne de Millemeister. That's how I feel about it. And it takes up all my energy as it is.
20 years after she launched her label, Anne de Millemeister still lives in Antwerp. She is one of the rare designers to have remained financially independent, and stylistically, she continues to make her mark.
When I saw this collection, I was really in tears because I see myself, you know, at 20, who loved poets and Baudelaire, 19th century Paris, you know, of everything possible. And it was a very emotional thing for me to see the collection. One word, poetry.
I never thought about the money. I had to do business to keep going, but that was not the starting point. I asked myself, what can I do for people to create more beauty, not just in clothes, but in the soul? How can I make the world a little bit more beautiful? That was the impression we had. It was very exciting. Now, when I look at how things have gone, I must say, I find it disappointing. I carry on, but the impression I had when I was 25, the vision I had of the year 2010, I imagine something completely different.
At a time when gratuitous catwalk stunts reign supreme, other designers resist. Martin Margiela continues to transform each one of his fashion shows into a laboratory. At the same time, he also sells in his boutiques parallel high-quality clothing lines that are now a little toned down, top-of-the-range basics that have acquired quite a following. In 2003, the Maison Margiela was bought out by the Italian Renzo Rosso's mass-market group Diesel, a partnership that is sometimes considered to be counterintuitive, but which confers durability on a radical fashion house.
For the last fashion show, which was the 20th birthday fashion show, Martin didn't want it to be a retrospective. A lot of people would have staged a sort of potpourri of the best pieces. He immediately threw out that idea, saying he definitely didn't want to do that. Conceptual explorations perhaps belong to the 1990s. The first years of the new millennium were perhaps something else, a new exploration. Nudity had come back with flesh bodies and carried on with certain codes. It was both a new direction, and at the same time, he didn't want to get stuck in a rut.
Until this final fashion show, Martin Margiela carried on researching. When he left his house for good in 2009, his fans were mortified. But as he didn't embody the house physically for the wider public, his withdrawal did not make waves. And the label's continuation under other designers has come into its own as Margiela has left many avenues open to explore. Since his withdrawal, Martin Margiela has completely turned the page and has disappeared from the fashion radar.
I wouldn't be possible without those people. So, I mean, I have no illusions about that. Yeah, I'm crazy about them.
At the start of the millennium, Rick Owens, an American in Paris, still managed to turn the anti-fashion slot into a success story. Noticed and sponsored by American Vogue, the still little-known Rick Owens tried his luck in France in 2003.
This is actually my third show period. I kind of started late. When you start doing shows, it's kind of, you know, you got to do it for the rest of your life. It's kind of a commitment. So that always kind of intimidated me before, but I don't know. I mean, it's kind of now a now or never kind of thing. I think that there is a fundamental need for people to gather together and experience beauty in a ceremony. I think that's just something people have to do.
On a fashion scene that was by now already saturated with fashion shows, Rick Owens managed to rekindle the infatuation at the beginnings of the Japanese designers. He gathered around him a tribe of disciples who swore by his Gothic, barbarian total look. By injecting glamour into his predecessors' black, sober styles, Rick Owens invented a look that made him the last of the anti-fashion Mohicans. He's one of the rare designers of the times to have created a fashion house that bears his name and yet remains independent. Today, when one might think the flame of anti-fashion is dying out, it remains alive and well, thanks to a few die-hard personalities. But will these houses survive beyond their designers?
So far, we have no choice. If I have to stop, if I fall down, I don't want somebody continue my brand, so-called Yojiamoto. Can be Japanese, can be European, young designer, can be Chinese, but I don't like it.
That's a very difficult question. You could say no, when the designer's gone, it's over. You could say that, and I'd understand. But at the same time, if a particular type of work has been carried out, if a voice is present, and the designer dies, for example, if other people understand the style and continue in the spirit of the designer's work, that's a beautiful thing. All the hard work is not lost. It can continue.
One day, I'm gonna, we're all gonna start fading away and you lose that. But for a minute, you think you're immortal.
Artist's role is to deny the reality. It's not true. Let's change. Let's break it. This is artist's role. So I always have a question that fashion designer is an artist or not. This is a deep question.
There's people that, like Rei Kawakubo, of course, everybody would have to admit that she's an artist.
Margiela. And the Mademoiselle.
When I reach the end of my life, and when I see everything that I've done all together, when my book is finished, I think I might consider that a work of art, my work of art.
How to end, how to stop. But I couldn't find the way to stop until now. So I declared in front of journalists, I will make all my effort until I fall down.